The cardboard boxes came first. One after another, they appeared in the glass-walled corridors of Meridian Tower, carried by men and women whose faces had gone pale with shock. Some clutched their belongings tight against their chests. Others let their arms hang loose, the boxes threatening to spill their contents onto the polished marble floors. Security guards stood at every exit, stone-faced, watching the procession with the detached professionalism of people who had seen this scene play out 100 times before. Marcus Ashford was still a billionaire, still driven, still ambitious, still carried the scars of betrayal that would never fully heal. But he was no longer alone in a fortress of his own making. He'd learned what James Cooper had known all along, what 23 years of sweeping the same streets had taught a divorced accountant who'd lost everything and found something better in the rubble. That dignity didn't come from never being betrayed. It came from choosing connection anyway, from waving at strangers, from sitting on benches with people who had nothing to gain from your friendship, from rebuilding trust one small gesture at a time, every single day, even when it got broken, especially when it got broken. The street got dirty, you cleaned it. The trust got broken, you rebuilt it. That was the work. That was always the work. And Marcus Ashford, who'd fired half his company in a fit of paranoid rage, who'd nearly destroyed everything he'd built in pursuit of a single betrayer, who'd collapsed on a sidewalk because his mind couldn't carry the weight of absolute suspicion anymore, finally understood something fundamental about being human. You couldn't protect yourself from pain by refusing to feel anything. You couldn't avoid betrayal by trusting no one. You couldn't build something meaningful by assuming everyone was your enemy. The only way forward was through connection. Messy, risky, potentially painful connection. With people who might let you down, who might steal from you, who might leave when things got hard, but who might also save you when you were drowning, who might tell you the truth when everyone else was lying, who might wave at you every morning for no reason except that you looked like someone who needed a friendly gesture. 2 years after that panic attack on the sidewalk, Marcus stood in the main lobby of Meridian Tower during the company's annual celebration. Employees filled the space, laughing, talking, celebrating a year of growth and recovery. The atmosphere was different from the old days. Less cutthroat, less paranoid. People seemed to actually enjoy being there. Co-op stood near the refreshment table, looking slightly uncomfortable in a suit instead of his usual business casual. Several employees were talking to him, genuinely engaged, treating him not as Marcus's charity case, but as a respected member of the leadership team. Marcus watched from a distance, nursing a glass of wine, thinking about how improbable this all was. That a street cleaner had become his most trusted advisor. That small gestures of kindness had led to fundamental transformation. That the man he'd ignored for years had ended up teaching him the most important lesson of his life. Patricia Chun approached him. She'd come back to Meridian 6 months earlier, cautiously accepting Marcus's apology and his offer to return as CFO. Their relationship was still rebuilding. Still careful, but functional. Quite a change from 2 years ago, she observed. Yes, Marcus agreed. You know, people are still talking about it. About you hiring a street cleaner to be director of integrity. About whether it was genius or insanity. What do you think? Patricia smiled. I think it was both. The best decisions usually are. She paused. You're different now, Marcus. Not completely different. You still drive people hard, still demand excellence, still have moments where the old paranoia surfaces. But you're human again. That matters. After she walked away, Coop came over, loosening his tie. I hate these things, he said. Too many people, too much small talk. Give me a broom and a sidewalk any day. You can leave if you want, Marcus said. Your presence has been noted and appreciated. Nah, I'll stay. Part of the job? Co-op looked around at the crowd. They're good people, most of them. Still scared of you sometimes, but less than before. That's progress. Do you ever regret it? Leaving street cleaning for this? Co-op considered the question. Sometimes, when I'm in back-to-back meetings or dealing with corporate politics or wearing uncomfortable shoes. But mostly no. This matters more. Not because the work is more important than cleaning streets, but because I can actually help here. Can actually make a difference in people's lives. You made a difference in mine. I waved at you, Marcus. That's all I did. You did the hard work of changing. You did more than wave. You sat with me when I was falling apart. You told me the truth when everyone else was either afraid to or trying to manipulate me. You took a risk on me when you had no reason to trust that it would work out. Coop shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. Like I said, character over position, trust over suspicion, connection over safety. Basic stuff that saved my life. They stood there together. The billionaire and the former street cleaner, watching the company celebrate. Two men who'd been drowning in different ways, who'd found unexpected salvation in an unlikely friendship built on simple gestures and honest conversations. The party continued around them. Deals would be made tomorrow. Challenges would arise. Some people would betray trust. Some decisions would backfire. The world wouldn't suddenly become safe just because Marcus had learned to be less paranoid, but he'd survive it. They'd survive it. Together, with all the other people he was learning to trust again, one careful choice at a time. Because that was the secret James Cooper had tried to teach him on that bench outside Meridian Tower. The lesson that had taken months to truly understand. Trust wasn't the absence of risk. It was the decision to take risk anyway, to choose connection over isolation, to wave at strangers and sit with broken people and believe that humanity was worth the inevitable pain. The street got dirty every day. You cleaned it every day. The trust got broken sometimes. You rebuilt it anyway. That was the work. That was life. That was the only way forward that didn't end in an empty building and a panic attack and the slow death of everything that made existence worthwhile. Marcus raised his glass slightly toward Coop. Coop raised his water bottle in return. A small gesture, a simple acknowledgement, the kind of thing that happened 1,000 times a day between people who'd learned to trust each other. The kind of thing that changed everything. Ashford stood in the center of the main floor, his arms crossed, his jaw set like granite. He was 53 years old, worth $4.7 billion, and he had just fired 247 people in a single morning. The building smelled like fear and printer ink. Someone was crying in the women's bathroom on the 3rd floor. Someone else had thrown a stapler through a window on the 7th. Marcus heard the glass shatter from 3 floors down and didn't flinch. Mr. Ashford, sir, please, I have a mortgage. I have kids in college. A middle-aged man in a wrinkled shirt approached him, his voice cracking. Marcus didn't look at him. He'd stopped looking at people weeks ago. Every face was a potential traitor. Every smile was a mask. Every handshake was a prelude to betrayal. Security, Marcus said quietly, and 2 guards appeared as if summoned by telepathy. They escorted the man toward the exit. He was still pleading as the elevator doors closed on him. The CFO, Patricia Chun, stood near the reception desk, her tablet clutched in both hands like a shield. She'd worked for Marcus for 11 years. She'd helped him build Meridian from a mid-tier investment firm into a powerhouse that moved markets. Now she looked at him like he was a stranger. Marcus, this is insane, she said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. You're gutting the company. We're going to lose clients. We're going to lose credibility. You're acting like everyone here is out to get you. Marcus turned to her slowly. His eyes were bloodshot. He hadn't slept properly in 3 weeks. Because they are, he said. Or they will be. It's only a matter of time. Patricia opened her mouth to respond, then closed it. She'd tried reasoning with him before. It was like talking to a wall that occasionally insulted you. More boxes. More faces. A young analyst who'd only been with the company 6 months walked past carrying a potted succulent and a picture of her dog. She'd been part of the data analysis team. Marcus had eliminated the entire department that morning. Not because they'd done anything wrong. Because they had access. Access meant risk. Risk meant betrayal. It was mathematical. By noon, the building felt like a ghost town. The remaining employees moved through the halls like survivors of a natural disaster, speaking in hushed tones, avoiding eye contact with their boss. Marcus stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office on the 20th floor and looked down at the street below. That's when he saw him. The street cleaner. He was maybe 60 years old, wearing a bright orange vest and pushing a wheeled trash bin along the sidewalk. He moved with the unhurried rhythm of someone who'd done the same job for decades. As Marcus watched, the man paused, looked up at the building, and waved. Not at anyone in particular, just waved. A simple gesture, almost reflexive. Then he went back to sweeping, his broom making long, steady strokes across the concrete. Marcus stared at that wave for a long time. It was the only thing anyone had done that day that didn't feel calculated. It didn't feel like manipulation or strategy or survival instinct. It was just a man waving at a building. For reasons Marcus couldn't explain, that bothered him more than anything else that had happened. He turned away from the window and walked back to his desk. There were contracts to review, surveillance footage to analyze, phone records to cross-reference. He had work to do. He had enemies to identify, but that wave stayed with him. It lodged itself somewhere in the back of his skull and refused to leave, like a splinter under the skin that you can't quite reach to pull out. Patricia knocked on his door an hour later. She didn't wait for permission to enter. "I'm resigning," she said, placing a single sheet of paper on his desk. Effective immediately. Marcus didn't look up from his computer screen. "Fine, Marcus, look at me." Her voice was sharp now, stripped of the professional courtesy that had defined their working relationship. "Look at what you're doing. Look at what you've become." He looked at her then. Really looked. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying. Patricia Chun, who'd negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking, who'd stared down hostile board members and federal regulators, had been crying. "You used to be someone worth working for," she said quietly. "Now you're just someone to be afraid of." She left before he could respond. Not that he had anything to say. What could he say? That she was wrong. She wasn't. That he was justified? Maybe he was. Probably he was. The evidence was there, scattered across 3 hard drives and 24 encrypted files. Someone had been stealing from him. Someone had been selling his secrets. Someone had been planning to destroy everything he'd built. He just couldn't prove who yet, so he'd eliminated the possibilities. Cut away the rot before it could spread. It was logical. It was necessary. It was survival. Outside, the street cleaner finished his route and disappeared around the corner. Marcus watched him go, then pulled up another spreadsheet, another set of numbers that refused to add up the way they should. The building got quieter as the day wore on. By 5 o'clock, most of the remaining staff had left. They didn't linger. They didn't gather in the break room to gossip and decompress the way they used to. They just grabbed their things and fled, like animals sensing an approaching storm. Marcus worked until midnight. Then he called his driver and went home to his penthouse apartment overlooking the city. He stood on his balcony and looked at the lights below, thousands of windows, millions of people, and felt nothing but a cold, hollow certainty that every single one of them would betray him if given the chance. He went inside, took a sleeping pill, and lay down in his bed. Sleep didn't come easy. It never did anymore. But eventually, exhaustion won, and he drifted off into uneasy dreams of signatures and spreadsheets and cardboard boxes piling up like coffins. When morning came, he got up, showered, dressed in another perfectly tailored suit. and went back to Meridian Tower. The street cleaner was already there, sweeping the same stretch of sidewalk he'd swept the day before. As Marcus climbed out of his car, the man looked up and waved again. Same gesture, same friendly, meaningless acknowledgement. Marcus stared at him for a moment, then walked inside without responding. The man went back to sweeping, and somewhere in the cold, paranoid machinery of Marcus Ashford's mind, something shifted. Just barely, just enough to notice. He didn't know what that shift meant yet, but it was there. A crack in the armor, a single point of light in a darkness that had been absolute for longer than he cared to remember. The street cleaner swept, Marcus went to work, and the story that would change both their lives had already begun, though neither of them knew it yet. The discovery had happened 6 weeks earlier, though it felt like 6 years. Marcus had been working late, as usual, reviewing quarterly projections in his office, when he noticed something odd in the accounts. A series of transfers, small enough to avoid automated flags, but large enough to matter when added up. $3.2 million, moved in increments over 18 months, routed through shell companies in 3 different countries before disappearing into accounts he couldn't trace. He'd called in his head of security, a former FBI agent named Raymond Walsh. Walsh had looked at the numbers, frowned, and said the words that had poisoned everything since. This was done by someone with intimate knowledge of your systems, someone senior. Marcus had spent the next week sleeping 4 hours a night, reviewing every transaction, every contract, every communication that crossed his desk. The pattern was there once you knew to look for it. Someone had been bleeding his company dry, slowly and carefully, with the precision of a surgeon. The problem was, he couldn't identify who. The sophistication of the theft suggested someone in his inner circle, someone he trusted, someone he'd probably had lunch with, shared drinks with, maybe even confided in during the long hours of building Meridian from the ground up. That realization had been worse than discovering the theft itself. It meant that someone he'd considered an ally, maybe even a friend, had looked him in the eye and lied, had smiled and plotted his downfall, had taken his trust and weaponized it. Marcus had learned long ago that sentiment was a weakness in business, but he'd believed, foolishly, that loyalty could be earned through fair treatment and shared success. He'd paid his people well, given them opportunities, treated them with respect, or what passed for respect in the cutthroat world of high finance, and someone had repaid that by robbing him blind. So he'd done what he thought was necessary. He'd compartmentalized the company, restricted access, installed new security protocols. He'd hired a team of forensic accountants and given them unlimited resources to find the leak. And when that hadn't been enough, when the investigation had stalled and the paranoia had grown like cancer in his chest, he'd made the decision. Eliminate the possibilities. Cut away the infected tissue. Fire everyone who could have been responsible, and sort out the innocent casualties later. Patricia had been right to call it insane. It was insane. But what else could he do? Wait for the next theft? Wait for whoever was behind this to sell his proprietary algorithms to competitors? Wait for the entire company to collapse while he played detective? No. Better to burn it down and rebuild from the ashes. Better to trust no one than to trust the wrong person. Now, 3 weeks into his purge, Marcus spent his days reviewing security footage, his nights reading psychological profiles of former employees, his every waking moment searching for patterns and connections that might reveal the traitor's identity. The office had become a tomb. The 60 employees who remained moved through the building like ghosts, terrified that they'd be next. Marcus had installed cameras in every hallway, every conference room, every break area. He'd implemented a policy requiring all electronic communications to be logged and reviewed. He'd banned personal devices from the building. He'd hired a team of security contractors who dressed in black and stood at corners like sentries guarding a prison. His assistant, A young woman named Claire, who'd been with him for 3 years, quit without notice. She left her key card on her desk and walked out during lunch. Marcus found out when she didn't return from break. He felt nothing except a vague satisfaction that he'd have one fewer variable to worry about. His board of directors called an emergency meeting. They sat around the long conference table, looking at him with expressions that ranged from concern to barely concealed hostility. "Marcus, you're destroying shareholder value," said David Brennan, the longest-serving board member. "Our stock is down 18% in 3 weeks. Clients are asking questions. Some are taking their business elsewhere. This paranoia needs to stop." Marcus looked at each of them in turn. David, who'd invested in Meridian's first round of funding. Jennifer Park, who'd helped navigate the company through 2 recessions. Thomas Whitmore, who'd brought in the Dubai contract that had made them all rich. People he'd known for years. People who'd celebrated victories and weathered crises alongside him. Any one of them could be the traitor. "Show me proof that you're not involved," Marcus said calmly. "Complete financial disclosure. Bank records, investment portfolios, communication logs, everything. All of you." The silence that followed was absolute. "You're not serious," Jennifer said finally. "Completely serious. If you're innocent, you have nothing to hide." Thomas stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is outrageous. We're the board of directors, not suspects in your personal witch hunt." "Then refuse," Marcus said, "and I'll know everything I need to know." One by one, they left the conference room. None of them provided the documentation he'd requested. Marcus marked them all down as potential suspects and moved on to reviewing the IT department's server logs. The paranoia had its own logic, its own internal consistency. Once you accepted the premise that everyone was a potential enemy, every interaction became a chess move. Every conversation was an interrogation. Every smile was a manipulation tactic. Marcus stopped eating in restaurants. Someone could poison his food. He stopped using his regular driver. The man might be reporting his movements to competitors. He had his penthouse swept for bugs twice a week. He changed his passwords daily. He slept with his bedroom door locked and a security system that could detect movement in any room of his apartment. His lawyer, Michael Foster, came to see him on a Thursday afternoon. They'd known each other since law school. Michael had handled every major contract Marcus had ever signed. "You're having a breakdown," Michael said without preamble. "I'm saying this as your lawyer and your friend. You need to see someone. A therapist. A psychiatrist. Someone." Marcus was reviewing a contract, marking sections with a red pen. He didn't look up. "Did you steal from me, Michael?" "What?" "No." "Marcus, listen to yourself. Then why are you here? To convince me I'm crazy? To make me doubt my own judgment?" Marcus finally looked at him, his eyes cold and analytical. That's what someone would do if they were trying to cover their tracks. Gaslight the victim. Make them question reality. Michael stared at him for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly. "I can't help you if you won't help yourself." He left. Marcus added his name to the list. The only person who didn't avoid Marcus was Raymond Walsh, but that was because Walsh was being paid specifically to deal with him. Even Walsh was starting to look strained. He'd report his findings. Marcus would reject them as insufficient, and they'd start the cycle again. "We've traced the shell companies back to an IP address in Singapore," Walsh said during one of their daily briefings. "But the trail goes cold there. Whoever set this up knew what they were doing." "Keep looking," Marcus said. "Mr. Ashford, we've been looking for 6 weeks. We've interviewed 200 people. We've examined thousands of transactions. At some point, we need to consider the possibility that we're not going to find a smoking gun. Then we haven't looked hard enough." Walsh closed his folder with a snap. "Or maybe the problem isn't the investigation. Maybe it's the investigator." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. "Meaning what?" "Mean you're seeing conspiracies where there might be coincidence. You're treating loyal employees like criminals. You're destroying relationships that took years to build. Walsh leaned forward. I've worked hundreds of cases. And I'm telling you, this level of paranoia is not sustainable. It's not healthy. And it's not going to lead you to the truth. Are you saying I should just accept the theft? Let whoever did this get away with it? I'm saying you need to consider the possibility that the damage you're doing in pursuit of justice might be worse than the original crime. Marcus stood up. Your services are no longer required. Walsh didn't argue. He gathered his things, placed his security badge on the desk, and left. Marcus watched him go, then pulled out his phone and called a different security firm. He'd start the investigation from scratch. Someone else would find what Walsh couldn't. That night, Marcus stood on his balcony again, looking out at the city. The lights seemed colder than usual. The streets below were full of people going about their lives, unaware that somewhere among them was a thief who'd stolen from him and gotten away with it. Unaware that the world was full of predators and parasites, all wearing human faces, all pretending to be something they weren't. He went inside and took 2 sleeping pills instead of 1. Sleep came faster, but brought no rest. He dreamed of drowning in spreadsheets, of signatures that crawled across pages like insects, of voices whispering accusations that he couldn't quite make out. When he woke at 5 in the morning, his sheets were soaked with sweat and his hands were shaking. He took a shower, put on another suit, and went to work. The street cleaner was already there when Marcus arrived. The man was emptying a trash can near the building's entrance, moving with the same unhurried efficiency Marcus had observed every day for the past 3 weeks. As Marcus approached, the man looked up and smiled. "Morning," the street cleaner said. Just that. One word. No agenda. No manipulation. Just a simple greeting. Marcus hesitated for a fraction of a second, then walked past without responding. But something about that interaction stayed with him. The man didn't need anything from him, didn't want anything, wasn't trying to sell him something or steal something or manipulate him into a decision. It was the most honest interaction Marcus had experienced in weeks. He pushed the thought away and went inside. There was work to do, files to review, suspects to investigate. The paranoia demanded constant feeding, constant vigilance, constant suspicion. But somewhere in the back of his mind, in a place he didn't want to examine too closely, a small voice asked a question he couldn't answer. What if Walsh was right? What if the problem wasn't the investigation? What if the problem was him? Marcus silenced that voice and got back to work. The truth was out there. He just had to find it, no matter how long it took, no matter what it cost, no matter who he had to destroy along the way. His name was James Cooper, though most people just called him Co-op. He'd been cleaning streets in the downtown district for 23 years. Ever since he was 37 years old and fresh out of a divorce that had taken his house, his savings, and whatever optimism he'd carried into middle age. The job wasn't glamorous. It wasn't well paid, but it was steady, and after the chaos of his previous life, steady had been exactly what he needed. Co-op woke at 4:30 every morning in his small apartment on the east side. The building was old, with pipes that knocked and radiators that hissed, but the rent was affordable, and the landlady didn't ask questions. He'd shower, make instant coffee, eat toast with margarine, and be on the street by 5:45, just as the city was starting to wake up. His route covered 6 blocks, centered around the cluster of office towers that housed banks, law firms, and investment companies. Meridian Tower was right in the middle of his territory. He'd been cleaning the sidewalk outside that building since it opened 11 years ago, watching it grow from an ambitious startup to one of the most important financial players in the city. He'd seen Marcus Ashford plenty of times over the years, usually climbing out of expensive cars, usually on the phone, usually looking like a man with more important places to be. Co-op had waved at him a few times early on, just being friendly, the way he waved at anyone who made eye contact. Marcus had never waved back. That was fine. Busy people had busy minds. Coop's philosophy was simple. Do the work, do it well, and don't expect recognition. The street didn't care if you were proud of your work. It just got dirty again the next day. But there was something satisfying about that, something almost meditative. You swept. The street got clean. You moved to the next section. Concrete results. No ambiguity. No politics. No betrayal. The other street cleaners joked that Co-op took the job too seriously. Why bother getting every cigarette butt, every gum wrapper, every scattered leaf? It was all going to be trash again tomorrow. But Co-op couldn't work any other way. If you were going to do something, you did it right. That was how his father had raised him, back when his father was still alive and still speaking to him. His co-workers were a mixed group. There was Maria, who sent most of her paycheck back to family in Honduras. There was Dennis, who'd been homeless before landing this job and treated it like he'd won the lottery. There was young Park, who was working his way through community college and would probably move on to something better in a few years. They'd share coffee from thermoses during breaks, complain about their supervisors, trade stories about the weird things they found on the sidewalks. Co-op mostly listened. He'd learned that he wasn't great at small talk, wasn't great at maintaining friendships, wasn't great at much beyond showing up and doing the work. The divorce had taught him that. His ex-wife had made it very clear in her final tirade that he was boring, predictable, and emotionally unavailable. She'd wanted passion, adventure, spontaneity. He'd offered stability, consistency, routine. Turned out those things weren't enough, but they were enough for street cleaning. The street appreciated consistency. The street didn't ask him to be someone he wasn't. Over the years, Co-op had developed a relationship with his route, the way some people develop relationships with pets. He knew which corners accumulated the most litter. He knew which buildings had smokers who'd cluster outside during breaks. He knew which restaurants needed extra attention on weekend mornings, when drunk people had been wandering past the night before. Meridian Tower was generally one of the cleaner spots. Professional environment, professional people. They didn't throw trash on the ground as much as some of the other buildings, though lately that had changed. In the past few weeks, he'd found more cigarette butts, more coffee cups, more evidence of stressed people taking quick breaks outside and not caring where their trash ended up. Something was happening inside that building. Co-op didn't know what exactly, but he could read the signs. He'd seen the people walking out with cardboard boxes. He'd seen the security guards posted at the doors. He'd seen the way the remaining employees looked when they came outside, like soldiers who'd survived a battle but weren't sure if the war was over. And he'd seen the change in Marcus Ashford. The man had always been intense, always moving with purpose, always locked in conversation or lost in thought. But lately, there was something different, something harder. The way he moved, the way he held his shoulders, the way his eyes swept across everything like he was searching for threats. Co-op had seen that look before, in his own reflection after the divorce, when he trusted no one and expected betrayal from every direction. It was the look of a man who'd been wounded and was determined not to be wounded again. Coop felt a pang of recognition, maybe even sympathy. He didn't know what had happened to Marcus Ashford, didn't know what had triggered this transformation. But he knew what it felt like to be that isolated, that defensive, that certain that the world was full of people waiting to hurt you. So he kept waving, every morning. Just a simple gesture, nothing demanding, nothing that required a response. Just an acknowledgement that Marcus Ashford was a human being who deserved basic courtesy. The same courtesy Co-op extended to everyone on his route, from the baristas who threw him grateful smiles to the business people who barely saw him. Most of the time, Marcus ignored the wave. Once or twice, Co-op thought he saw the man's eyes flicker in his direction, a moment of awareness before returning to whatever internal calculations occupied his mind. That was fine. Co-op wasn't waving for recognition. He was waving because it was the right thing to do. His supervisor, a heavy-set man named Rodriguez, occasionally asked why Co-op bothered. "These people don't even see you, man. To them, you're part of the scenery. Like a fire hydrant or a parking meter." Co-op would shrug. "Doesn't matter if they see me. I see them." Rodriguez would shake his head and move on. He'd learned years ago that Co-op was going to do things his way, regardless of what anyone else thought. The truth was, Co-op liked being invisible, preferred it, actually. There was a freedom in being overlooked, in doing your work without anyone watching or judging or expecting you to be something more than what you were. The street cleaners were the city's ghosts, moving through the early morning hours, maintaining order while the important people slept. But invisibility came with a cost. It meant being lonely. It meant going days without a meaningful conversation. It meant eating dinner alone in your apartment, watching television shows you didn't care about, going to bed alone and waking up alone, and spending your days surrounded by people who didn't know your name. Co-op had made peace with that loneliness, or thought he had. Most days, it was manageable. Most days, the routine was enough to keep the darker thoughts at bay. Most days, he could convince himself that he'd chosen this life rather than having it chosen for him. But sometimes, usually late at night when the apartment was too quiet and the pipes knocked like ghosts in the walls, he'd wonder what his life might have looked like if he'd been different, more charismatic, more ambitious, more willing to fight for connection instead of accepting isolation. Those thoughts never led anywhere productive, so he'd push them away and focus on tomorrow's route, tomorrow's work, tomorrow's chance to do something simple and real. He'd been cleaning the streets for 23 years. He'd probably clean them for another 20 if his back held out. It wasn't the life he'd imagined when he was young and full of dreams about what adulthood would bring, but it was his life, and there was dignity in it, even if no one else recognized that dignity. Even if he barely recognized it himself sometimes. Co-op finished emptying the trash can near Meridian Tower's entrance and moved on to the next section of sidewalk. His broom made long, steady strokes across the concrete, gathering leaves and wrappers and the invisible evidence of thousands of people passing through this space. The sun was starting to rise, painting the glass towers in shades of gold and orange. It was going to be a good day for cleaning. Clear skies, light wind, temperature in the 60s. The kind of day that made the work almost pleasant. He saw Marcus Ashford arrive and offered his usual wave. Marcus walked past without acknowledgement, his face carved from stone, his eyes looking at something far away or deep inside. Coop watched him go, felt that familiar pang of recognition, and went back to sweeping. The street got clean. Co-op moved to the next block. The city woke up around him. And somewhere in the distance, in a building full of fear and suspicion and broken trust, Marcus Ashford went about the grim work of searching for enemies. Neither of them knew that their paths were about to converge in a way that would change everything. That the invisible man and the paranoid billionaire were on a collision course orchestrated by nothing more than circumstance and desperation. But the city knew. The city always knew. It had seen a million stories play out on its streets, and it was patient enough to wait for one more. Co-op swept. Marcus plodded, and the distance between them grew smaller with every passing day. It happened on a Tuesday morning, 6 weeks after the mass firing. Marcus had been awake for 38 hours straight, sustained by coffee, prescription stimulants, and the manic energy of a man convinced he was closing in on the truth. He'd finally found a pattern in the data. A series of communications between 3 former employees, encrypted messages that referenced the project and final distribution. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was more than he'd had before. He'd called an emergency meeting with his legal team, only to discover that 2 of the 3 lawyers on retainer had quit that morning. No warning, no explanation. Just resignation letters left with the receptionist. The 3rd lawyer, a woman named Sarah Chun, had listened to his evidence for 15 minutes before telling him, very carefully, that what he was describing might be paranoid delusion rather than criminal conspiracy. Marcus had fired her on the spot. Then he'd gone back to his office and spent the next 6 hours trying to decrypt the messages himself, using software he barely understood, following tutorials on YouTube, while his hands shook from too much caffeine and too little sleep. The encryption held. The messages remained gibberish. And somewhere around 2 in the afternoon, Marcus felt something crack in his chest. Not physically, nothing medical, but something internal. Some load-bearing beam in the architecture of his psyche that had been holding too much weight for too long. It cracked, and the whole structure began to fold in on itself. He stood up from his desk, his vision swimming. The office was too bright. The walls were too close. His heart was hammering against his ribs, like it was trying to escape his chest. He couldn't breathe properly. Each inhale felt shallow, insufficient, like breathing through a straw. The rational part of his mind, the part that had built $1 billion company through ruthless logic and strategic thinking, recognized what was happening. Panic attack, anxiety response, psychological breakdown. The terminology didn't matter. What mattered was that he couldn't stop it. He stumbled toward the door, needing air, needing space, needing anything except the suffocating pressure of that office. The hallway stretched in front of him like a tunnel. The few remaining employees scattered as he passed, pressing themselves against walls, their eyes wide with alarm or fear, or whatever emotion you felt when watching your boss fall apart in real time. The elevator took forever. Marcus stood in front of the closed doors, breathing hard, his vision tunneling. His hands were numb. His face was numb. Everything was numb except for the hammering of his heart and the crushing weight in his chest. When the doors finally opened, he practically fell inside, jabbing the button for the ground floor. A woman tried to get in with him. He threw out a hand to stop her, unable to form words, and she backed away quickly. The doors closed. The elevator descended. Marcus leaned against the wall and tried to remember how to breathe normally. The lobby was full of people, too many people, all of them potential threats, potential thieves, potential traitors. Their voices created a wall of sound that pressed against his skull. He pushed through them, not caring who he shoved aside, focused only on getting outside, getting to air, getting away from the building that had become his prison. The glass doors opened automatically. He stumbled through them and out onto the sidewalk. The morning sun hit him like a slap. He bent forward, hands on his knees, trying to force air into lungs that didn't seem to want it. His heart was beating so fast he thought it might explode. Black spots danced in his vision. The concrete beneath his feet tilted at a wrong angle. He was dying. He had to be dying. This was a heart attack, or a stroke, or something catastrophic that happened when you pushed yourself too hard for too long. His body was giving out. The paranoia had been justified, because look, here was the proof. Here was the final betrayal, his own biology turning against him. Someone touched his shoulder. Marcus jerked away, nearly falling, his hands coming up defensively. The person stepped back, hands raised in a calming gesture. Through the haze of panic, Marcus recognized him. The street cleaner, the man who waved every morning. James something. Coop. Easy, Co-op said. His voice was calm, steady, with the cadence of someone who dealt with panic before. You're okay. You're just having a panic attack. You're not dying. I promise you're not dying. Marcus tried to speak, but could only manage a gasping sound. The black spots in his vision were getting bigger. The world was tilting further. He was going to pass out. He was going to collapse on the sidewalk in front of his own building, and everyone would see, and it would be in the news, and his enemies would know they'd won. "Look at me," Co-op said, moving into Marcus's field of vision. "Right here. Eyes on me. Breathe with me. In through your nose. Count to 4. Marcus stared at this stranger in an orange vest, who had no reason to help and every reason to walk away. Coop breathed in slowly, deliberately, counting out loud. 1, 2, 3, 4. His chest expanded. His expression remained calm. Against all logic, Marcus found himself trying to match the rhythm. In through the nose. 1, 2, 3, 4. It didn't work. His lungs were too tight. His throat was too constricted. "Keep trying," Co-op said. "Hold it for 2 counts. Then out through your mouth for 4 counts. You've got this. In. 1, 2, 3, 4. They stood there on the sidewalk, a billionaire and a street cleaner, breathing together. People walked around them, some staring, most ignoring them with the practiced disinterest of city dwellers who'd seen stranger things. Marcus focused on Coop's face, on the steady rhythm of his breathing, on the patient expression that held no judgment or mockery or fear. Slowly, impossibly, the panic began to recede, the black spots faded, the tilting world straightened. His heart was still racing, but the crushing pressure in his chest eased enough to let real air in. He managed a full breath, then another, then a third that didn't feel like drowning. "There you go," Co-op said. "You're doing great. Keep breathing. Nice and slow. Nothing to prove. Just breath work." Marcus realized he was crying. Tears were streaming down his face, and he couldn't remember when they'd started. He wiped at them roughly with the back of his hand, embarrassed, furious at himself for this display of weakness. "It's okay," Co-op said. "Panic attacks will do that. Your body's dumping stress hormones. The tears are just drainage. Nothing to be ashamed of." Marcus finally found his voice. "How do you know?" Coop shrugged. "Had enough of them myself, years ago, after my divorce. Thought I was having heart attacks every other day. Went to the emergency room 3 times before a doctor explained what was really happening." He paused. "You want to sit down? There's a bench right there." Marcus looked at the bench. It was a simple wooden affair, installed by the city, where people waited for buses or ate their lunch. He'd walked past it thousands of times and never sat on it once. The idea of sitting there now, in his $3,000 suit, after crying in public, while his company fell apart upstairs, seemed absurd. He sat down anyway. His legs were shaking too badly to keep standing. Coop sat beside him, maintaining a respectful distance. He didn't say anything, just sat there, comfortable with the silence, while Marcus tried to piece together what had just happened. The panic had passed, leaving behind exhaustion so profound it felt like gravity had tripled. Marcus slumped against the bench, staring at the sidewalk between his feet. His expensive Italian shoes looked absurd next to Coop's worn work boots. Everything looked absurd. His entire life looked absurd from this angle. "I haven't slept in 2 days," Marcus heard himself say. He didn't know why he was talking to this stranger. Didn't know why the words were coming out. "I can't remember the last time I ate a real meal. I've fired 247 people. My board wants me removed. My lawyers quit. And I still don't know who stole from me." Co-op nodded slowly. "Sounds like you're carrying a lot. Someone betrayed me. Someone I trusted. Someone who worked for me, who I paid well, who I treated fairly. They stole $3.2 million, and I can't prove who did it. So yes, I'm carrying a lot. That why you fired all those people?" Marcus turned to look at him. "You noticed that? Hard not to. Been watching cardboard boxes come out of that building for weeks now. People crying. Security everywhere. Something bad happened in there. Something bad is still happening. I just can't see it clearly enough to stop it." Marcus ran his hands through his hair. It felt greasy. He couldn't remember when he'd last showered. Everyone's a suspect. Everyone could be lying. How do you trust anyone when you know for certain that someone you trusted already betrayed you? Co-op was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You don't." Marcus blinked. "What? You don't trust anyone?" "Not at first. Trust has to be earned. But here's the thing." Coop leaned back against the bench, stretching his legs out. "If you decide from the start that nobody can be trusted, then you're guaranteed to be right. Because you'll never give anyone the chance to prove otherwise." That's circular logic, maybe, but it's also true. Co-op looked at him. "I'm not smart like you. I clean streets for a living, but I know what it's like to think everyone's out to get you. After my divorce, I was convinced the whole world was full of liars and cheaters. Thought my ex-wife had poisoned everyone against me. Thought my friends were secretly laughing at me. Thought my family was judging me. Were they? Some were, some weren't. But I treated them all the same. Pushed everyone away. Stopped returning calls. Stopped showing up to things. Became this angry, bitter guy who nobody wanted to be around." He shrugged. "Eventually, I realized I'd done exactly what I was afraid of. I'd made myself alone. Not because everyone betrayed me, but because I didn't give anyone the chance not to." Marcus stared at him. "So what? I'm supposed to just trust people blindly? Pretend nothing happened? Let whoever stole from me get away with it?" "Didn't say that. Side trust has to be earned, but earning requires opportunity. You fire everyone, suspect everyone, treat everyone like criminals. You remove all the opportunities. All you're left with is your suspicions and an empty building. Better an empty building than a building full of thieves. Is it though?" Co-op gestured at Marcus. "Look at you. You just had a panic attack on a public sidewalk. You're crying. You can't sleep. You can't eat. You've pushed away everyone who could help you. Does this feel better?" Marcus opened his mouth to respond, then closed it, because the answer was no. This didn't feel better. This felt like dying slowly, like drowning in paranoia and isolation, like building a fortress, so secure that he'd trapped himself inside, with nothing but his own fear for company. "I built that company from nothing," Marcus said quietly. "Took 15 years of 80-hour weeks, of risking everything, of sacrificing relationships and health, and any semblance of normal life. And someone took what I built and used it against me. Someone I trusted enough to give access to my system, my accounts, my proprietary information. How do I come back from that? One person at a time." Co-op stood up, stretching. "Look, I need to finish my route, but here's what I know. Street cleaning is simple work. You sweep the same streets every day. Same trash, same corners, same routine. And every single day, without fail, the street gets dirty again. You could give up, say it's pointless, stop trying. But then you just have dirty streets. What's your point? Point is, trust is like that. It gets broken, you rebuild it. It's broken again, you rebuild it again. It's not about never getting betrayed. It's about deciding that connection is worth the risk of betrayal. Otherwise, you're just living in dirt and calling it safety." Coop picked up his broom and trash grabber. "You should go home, get some sleep, eat something. Your brain doesn't work right when you're running on fumes." He started to walk away, then paused. "For what it's worth, I've been waving at you every morning for 3 weeks. Not because I want something from you. Not because I'm trying to manipulate you or steal from you or whatever you think everyone's trying to do. Just because you looked like someone who could use a friendly gesture. That's all. No agenda." Marcus watched him go, watched him push his cart down the sidewalk, and resume sweeping with the same patient efficiency he'd demonstrated every morning. A man doing simple work with simple motivations, living a simple life that somehow seemed more functional than Marcus's billion-dollar existence. Security personnel from Meridian Tower came outside, looking for him. Marcus waved them away. He needed a few more minutes. Needed to sit on this bench and think about what Co-op had said about trust and isolation and whether the cure was worse than the disease. His phone was ringing. It had been ringing throughout the entire panic attack. Dozens of missed calls, hundreds of unread messages. The world demanding his attention, his decisions, his participation. The machine of Meridian Industries, grinding on even as its architect fell apart. Marcus stood up, his legs still unsteady but functional. He looked at his reflection in the glass doors of the building, disheveled suit, red eyes. The face of a man who'd gone to war with himself and lost. Maybe Co-op was right. Maybe this wasn't better. Maybe an empty building full of suspicions wasn't victory. It was just another form of defeat, slower and more painful than whatever his unknown enemy had planned. He went back inside, took the elevator to his office, sat at his desk, and looked at the files he'd been reviewing, the encrypted messages he'd been trying to decode, the massive investigation that had consumed his life and produced nothing but misery. Then he did something he hadn't done in 6 weeks. He closed the files, shut down his computer, stood up, and walked out of the office, leaving everything behind. He went home. Actually went home instead of staying at the office until midnight. He took a shower that lasted 30 minutes. He ordered food from a restaurant, real food, and ate it slowly while sitting on his balcony, watching the city lights. He took a sleeping pill and lay down in his bed, and for the first time in weeks, fell asleep without reviewing spreadsheets in his mind. When he woke up 12 hours later, the paranoia was still there. The suspicion was still there. The certainty that someone had betrayed him was still there. But something else was there too. Something small and fragile that hadn't existed the day before. A question. A tiny, uncomfortable question that his exhausted brain had been too tired to suppress. What if Co-op was right? Marcus returned to work the next day, feeling almost human. The sleep had helped. The food had helped. The shower had helped. He was still running on fumes, still damaged, still paranoid, but functional in a way he hadn't been for weeks. The office felt different, or maybe he felt different in the office. The cameras were still there. The security guards were still there. The empty desks were still there, monuments to his purge. But seeing them now, after his conversation with Co-op, they looked less like necessary precautions and more like symptoms of something broken. He went through his morning routine mechanically. Coffee, emails, conference calls. But his mind kept drifting back to that bench, to those simple words about trust and isolation and the choice between connection and safety. Around 10 in the morning, he looked out his window and saw Co-op finishing his route. A man was emptying the last trash can on the block, moving with the same unhurried efficiency. Marcus watched him work for a long moment, then made a decision that surprised him. He left his office, took the elevator down, and walked outside. Coop was loading his cart, preparing to move to the next section of his territory. He looked up when Marcus approached, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe? Or concern that yesterday's breakdown was about to repeat itself. "I want to talk to you," Marcus said. "If you have time." Co-op glanced at his watch. "I've got a 15-minute break coming up. There's a coffee shop around the corner." 20 minutes later, they sat across from each other in a small cafe that Marcus had walked past 1,000 times but never entered. Co-op had ordered black coffee and a muffin. Marcus had ordered espresso and nothing else, his stomach still uncertain about food. "I thought about what you said," Marcus began, "about trust and isolation, about treating everyone like criminals." Co-op sipped his coffee. "Okay, and I think you're wrong. Not completely wrong, but wrong enough to matter." Marcus leaned forward. "You live in a simpler world than I do. You clean streets. The stakes are low. If someone betrays your trust, what do you lose? Maybe a friendship, maybe some dignity. But I lose millions of dollars. I lose proprietary algorithms worth billions. I lose everything I've built. True, Co-op said. The stakes are different, so you understand why I can't just decide to trust people. Why I can't give opportunities without vetting them, without protecting myself, without assuming the worst until proven otherwise. I understand why you think that's the only option. Single quotes. Coop broke off a piece of muffin. But here's what I'm curious about. How's that working out for you? Marcus sat back. What do you mean? I mean, you've been operating under that philosophy for weeks now. Trusting nobody. Firing everyone who might be a threat. Installing cameras, reviewing files, treating every person in your company like a suspect. And from what I can see, you're more miserable now than when you started. You had a panic attack yesterday. You look like you haven't slept in a month. Your building's half empty. So I'm asking, genuinely, how's that working out? Marcus opened his mouth to defend himself, then stopped. Because the honest answer was that it wasn't working out. The investigation had stalled. The thief was still unknown. And he'd destroyed his company, his relationships, and his mental health in the process. The alternative is worse, he said finally. If I don't protect myself, if I just blindly trust people, I'll get destroyed. Someone will take everything I have, maybe. Or maybe you're already destroying yourself, just doing it slower. Coop finished his muffin and pushed the plate aside. Can I tell you a story? Marcus gestured for him to continue. After my divorce, I got this job cleaning streets. Simple work, like I said. But I was so angry, so convinced everyone was against me, that I made it complicated. I'd accuse my coworkers of stealing my supplies. I'd report people to our supervisor for tiny violations. I'd refuse to help anyone because I figured they'd just take advantage of me. What happened? What do you think happened? Everyone started avoiding me. I became the paranoid guy nobody wanted to work with. Got written up twice for creating hostile work environment. Almost lost the job. Single quotes. Co-op shook his head. Finally, my supervisor sat me down and said something that changed everything. He said, Co-op, you're so busy protecting yourself from people who aren't trying to hurt you that you're hurting yourself worse than anyone else could. And that fixed everything? You just decided to trust people and life got better? No, life didn't magically get better. But I stopped making it worse. Started small. Said good morning to people instead of ignoring them. Helped when someone asked for help. Stopped assuming every interaction was a trap. He met Marcus's eyes. Some people still let me down. Some people still took advantage. But most people were just trying to do their jobs, same as me. And the ones who became friends made the risk worth it. Marcus stirred his espresso, even though it didn't need stirring. I had friends. People I thought were friends. Someone in that group stole from me. And that's terrible. Genuinely terrible. But here's the question. Would you rather have had those friendships and risk betrayal, or never have had them at all? That's easy. Never have had them. Then I wouldn't be in this situation. Co-op was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You sure about that? Because from where I'm sitting, you're in the situation anyway. You're betrayed, you're alone, and you're miserable. Only difference is, you didn't get any of the good years first. You just jumped straight to the pain. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. Because Co-op was right. The paranoia hadn't protected him. It had just isolated him. He'd lost the relationships without avoiding the betrayal. He'd gotten the worst of both worlds. I don't know how to come back from this, Marcus said quietly. I don't know how to stop seeing threats everywhere. Even sitting here with you, part of my brain is wondering why you're being nice to me. What you want, what your angle is, that's fair. I'm a stranger, but let me make it simple for you. Coop leaned forward. I don't want anything. I'm not trying to get a job at your company. I'm not trying to get money from you. I'm not trying to manipulate you or use you or whatever you're worried about. I'm talking to you because yesterday you had a breakdown on my sidewalk, and today you asked to talk. That's it. No angle. Why should I believe you? You shouldn't. Not yet. Belief comes later. For now, just consider the possibility that I'm telling the truth. Just hold that possibility in your mind alongside the paranoia. See which one serves you better. They sat in silence for a while. The cafe was filling up with the lunch crowd, office workers grabbing sandwiches and coffee before heading back to their buildings. Normal people living normal lives, trusting each other enough to function, getting betrayed sometimes, but surviving it and moving forward anyway. Tell me about your job, Marcus said suddenly. Not the cleaning part. Tell me why you've stayed with it for 23 years. What keeps you showing up? Co-op looked surprised by the question. You really want to know? I really want to know. So Co-op told him about the satisfaction of concrete results, of streets that were dirty becoming streets that were clean, about the quiet pride in doing simple work well, about the coworkers who'd become friends slowly, cautiously, despite his initial resistance, about the routine that provided structure when everything else in his life had fallen apart. It's not glamorous, Co-op said. Nobody's writing articles about street cleaners. Nobody's going to give me an award or put me on a magazine cover. But it's honest work. And at the end of the day, I can see what I've done. The street is cleaner because I was there. That matters to me. Marcus found himself envious of that simplicity. His work was abstract, numbers on spreadsheets, deals that happened in conference rooms, value that existed only as digital information. He couldn't point at something and say, I made that better today. Everything was ambiguous, contextual, subject to interpretation and market forces, and the whims of investors. What did you do before? Marcus asked. Before the divorce, before street cleaning, I was an accountant. Small firm, nothing fancy. Balanced books for local businesses. Did tax returns, that kind of thing. Co-op smiled slightly. Ironic, right? I went from sitting at a desk all day to sweeping streets. Most people would call that a downgrade. Do you? Sometimes. When my back hurts, or when it's raining, or when I see people my age who stayed in offices and made more money, but mostly no. The accounting job paid better, but I hated it. Hated the politics, hated the pressure, hated sitting inside all day. This job is simpler. Lower stakes, like you said, but also lower stress. I sleep better now than I did then. Marcus thought about his own sleep, or lack thereof, thought about the prescription bottles in his bathroom, the meditation apps on his phone that he never used, the insomnia that had become his constant companion. I can't remember the last time I slept well, he admitted. Even before the theft, even before any of this, I'd lie awake running scenarios in my head, deals that might go wrong, competitors who might outmaneuver me, markets that might turn. It's like my brain never stops working. That's because you've trained it not to. You've told yourself that constant vigilance is necessary for survival. So your brain believes you. It stays alert all the time because you told it that's what it needs to do. And how do I untrain it? Slowly. Same way you trained it in the first place. Single quotes. Co-op checked his watch. I need to get back to work, but here's a suggestion. Tomorrow morning, when I wave at you, wave back. That's it. Just that one small gesture. See if the world ends. Marcus almost laughed. You think waving at you is going to fix my paranoia? No, but it might crack it a little. Let some light in. Sometimes that's enough to start. Coop stood up, leaving money on the table for his coffee and muffin. Thanks for the conversation. It was nice talking to someone about something real for a change. He left before Marcus could respond. Marcus sat there for another 10 minutes, finishing his espresso, watching the lunch crowd come and go, thinking about trust and risk, and whether small gestures could actually matter in the face of big problems. Eventually, he paid and went back to his office. The files were still there. The investigation was still there. The paranoia was still there, but something had shifted, just slightly, just enough to notice. That night, instead of working until midnight, Marcus left at 6. He went home, ordered dinner, ate it on his balcony. He didn't take a sleeping pill, didn't review files on his laptop, just sat in the evening air and thought about a street cleaner who'd lost everything and rebuilt a life from simplicity and routine. He still didn't sleep well. His mind still raced with scenarios and suspicions. But somewhere in the early morning hours, between anxiety spirals, he made a decision. Tomorrow, he'd wave back. It was a small thing, probably meaningless, probably wouldn't change anything. But Co-op was right about one thing. Operating under the assumption that everyone was an enemy had only made things worse. Maybe it was time to try something different, even if that something was as simple as waving at a street cleaner. The next morning, Marcus arrived at Meridian Tower at his usual time. The street cleaner was already there, sweeping the sidewalk with his characteristic patience. As Marcus approached, Coop looked up and offered his habitual wave. Marcus stopped walking. His hand felt heavy, like it was made of lead. Every instinct screamed that this was foolish, that showing friendliness was showing weakness, that any gesture of trust would be exploited. He waved back anyway. Coop's face broke into a genuine smile. Not a professional smile, not a manipulative smile, just a simple expression of human connection. He nodded and went back to sweeping. That was it. The world didn't end. No one saw the gesture as weakness. Nothing catastrophic happened. Marcus just waved at another human being, and that human being appreciated it, and then they both went about their days. It was such a small thing, such an absurdly small thing. But as Marcus rode the elevator up to his office, he felt something he hadn't felt in months. A tiny crack in the armor. A small space where paranoia wasn't absolute. The feeling didn't last long. By mid-morning, he was back in the files, back in the investigation, back in the grinding machinery of suspicion that had consumed his life. But the crack was there, and over the following days, it grew wider. He started waving at Co-op every morning, started nodding to the security guards instead of treating them like surveillance equipment, started saying good morning to the receptionist, a young woman named Angela who'd somehow survived the purge and looked perpetually terrified that she'd be next. These weren't grand gestures. They weren't evidence of transformation. They were just small acknowledgments that other people existed and deserved basic courtesy. But in the context of Marcus's recent behavior, they were revolutionary. 2 weeks after the conversation in the cafe, Marcus did something even more surprising. He invited Co-op to have lunch with him. They met at a small deli near Meridian Tower. Coop ordered a turkey sandwich and chips. Marcus ordered a salad he didn't eat. They sat at a table by the window, and for the first time in months, Marcus had a conversation that wasn't about work or investigations or betrayal. They talked about the city, about changes they'd both witnessed over the years, about buildings that had gone up, businesses that had closed, neighborhoods that had transformed. They talked about weather and sports, and the small observations that fill normal human interaction. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said eventually, and I want an honest answer. "Okay, when you look at me, what do you see?" Co-op considered the question carefully. "I see someone who's hurt, someone who's scared, someone who's built walls so high he can't see over them anymore. That's it. I also see someone who's trying. You're here, aren't you? Having lunch with a street cleaner instead of hiding in your office. That counts for something." Marcus pushed his salad around his plate. "I fired 247 people, destroyed careers, ruined lives, all because I couldn't figure out who betrayed me. How do I come back from that?" "Do you want to come back from it?" "I don't know. Part of me thinks I was justified. Part of me thinks I'm a monster. Both parts might be right. Single quotes. Co-op ate a chip thoughtfully. "My ex-wife used to say I was emotionally unavailable, sighed. I built walls to keep her out. She was right, but she was also part of the reason I built those walls. She'd criticize me, then get angry when I shut down. It was circular. We both made each other worse. What's your point? Point is, sometimes we're justified in our defenses, and they're still the wrong choice. The theft was real. The betrayal was real. Your response was real too. But real doesn't mean right. Marcus sat with that for a moment. I don't know how to rebuild what I've destroyed. Start with one person. Apologize to one person you wronged. See how that feels. Then maybe do it again. Apologize? The word felt foreign in Marcus's mouth. I'm the victim here. Someone stole from me, and then you victimized 246 innocent people trying to find one guilty one. Co-op met his eyes. You can be both the victim and the perpetrator, Marcus. Most people are at some point. Over the next month, something shifted in Marcus Ashford. Not dramatically, not completely, but enough to notice. He started coming in at reasonable hours instead of before dawn. He started leaving before midnight. He started eating regular meals and sleeping without pharmaceutical assistance. More importantly, he started talking to people again. Really talking, not interrogating. He reinstated 3 employees he'd fired, people whose innocence had been conclusively proven by the investigation. He apologized to them personally, acknowledged his mistake, offered compensation for their lost time. 2 of them accepted. One told him to go to hell and slammed the door in his face. Marcus accepted that too. He deserved worse. He hired a new HR director, someone from outside the company with no connection to the old regime. Together, they started rebuilding, carefully and slowly. Not filling all the positions that had been emptied, but filling some, bringing in fresh perspectives, people who hadn't been traumatized by the purge. The investigation continued, but Marcus was no longer running it himself. He'd hired professional forensic accountants, given them everything they needed, and stepped back. Either they'd find the thief, or they wouldn't. Either way, he couldn't keep sacrificing his sanity to the hunt. Throughout all of this, he kept meeting with Co-op, sometimes for coffee, sometimes for lunch, sometimes just brief conversations on the sidewalk before work. They'd become something like friends, though neither of them used that word. 2 men from completely different worlds, connected by circumstance and a shared understanding of what it meant to lose trust and try to rebuild it. I've been thinking, Marcus said one morning as they stood outside Meridian Tower. Co-op was finishing his route. Marcus was arriving for work. About what you said. About how trust has to be earned through opportunity. Yeah? I want to offer you a position. At Meridian. Co-op looked at him skeptically. Marcus, I clean streets. I don't know anything about finance. I don't want you in finance. I want you in a different role. Something I'm creating specifically. Marcus had been planning this for days, refining the idea, making sure it wasn't just impulsive gratitude. I'm calling it the integrity officer position. Your job would be to talk to people throughout the company. Listen to concerns. Be someone employees can approach without fear. Be a reality check when executives, including me, start making decisions based on paranoia instead of data. You want me to be your conscience? I want you to be an honest voice in a building full of calculated ones. You said trust comes from character, not position. Fine. I'm creating a position for character. Co-op was quiet for a long moment. How much does it pay? Marcus named a figure. It was modest by Meridian standards, but would be life-changing for someone making street cleaner wages. Coop's eyes widened. That's too much. It's exactly enough. You'd be doing something important, something I need, something the company needs. And what if I tell you things you don't want to hear? What if I say you're being paranoid again, or making bad decisions, or treating people poorly? Then I listen. That's the point. I need someone who'll tell me the truth, not what I want to hear. Marcus paused. Look, I know this is sudden. Take time to think about it. Talk it over with whoever you need to talk it over with. But I'm serious about this. I think you could help me rebuild something better than what I destroyed. Coop looked down at his broom, his trash grabber, his cart, the tools of a simple trade that had sustained him for 23 years. Then he looked up at Meridian Tower, at the glass and steel monument to ambition and wealth and everything he'd never been part of. "Can I still wave at you in the mornings?" he asked. Marcus smiled. Actually smiled, not the corporate approximation of a smile, but a real one. "I'd be disappointed if you stopped. Then I'll think about it." 3 days later, Co-op accepted the position. His supervisor at the street cleaning department threw him a small goodbye party. His coworkers were happy for him, though Marcus detected some skepticism in their congratulations. They'd seen people leave for better opportunities before. Sometimes it worked out. Sometimes it didn't. Co-op started at Meridian the following Monday. Marcus had set him up with an office on the main floor, not large but comfortable, with windows that looked out at the street he used to clean. The title on his door read, James Cooper, Director of Organizational Integrity. The remaining employees didn't know what to make of him. A street cleaner suddenly elevated to director level? It seemed like charity, or nepotism, or some elaborate joke. But Co-op approached the job the same way he'd approached street cleaning, with patience, consistency, and attention to detail. He spent his first weeks just listening, walking through departments, introducing himself, asking people how they were doing, not interrogating them or investigating them, just talking to them like human beings. Word spread that the new guy was safe to talk to, that he wasn't reporting back to Marcus, wasn't collecting dirt, wasn't playing corporate politics. Slowly, people started opening up about their concerns, about the lingering trauma from the mass firing, about their fear of the cameras and the security guards, and the atmosphere of suspicion that still permeated the building. Co-op brought it all to Marcus in their weekly meetings, not as accusations, but as observations. "People are still scared," he'd say. "They're doing their jobs, but they're not innovating, because innovation requires risk, and risk requires trust." Marcus listened. Sometimes he agreed. Sometimes he pushed back. They'd debate, argue, occasionally raise their voices. But it was productive conflict, the kind that led to better decisions, rather than entrenched positions. 3 months into Coop's tenure, Marcus made another significant change. He removed half the security cameras. The ones in hallways and public spaces stayed, but the ones in individual offices and break rooms came down. He reduced the security staff to pre-purge levels. He stopped requiring logged communications. Some of his remaining advisors warned that he was opening himself up to risk, that whoever had stolen from him before could strike again. That relaxing security was naive and dangerous. Marcus acknowledged those concerns. Then he did it anyway, because Co-op was right. You couldn't build a company on suspicion alone. You couldn't build anything on suspicion alone. At some point, you had to take the risk of trusting people, even knowing that some of them might betray that trust. The alternative was an empty building and a panic attack on a sidewalk. 6 months after Co-op joined Meridian, the forensic accountants finally cracked the case. The thief had been Douglas Morton, the former VP of Operations, who'd been fired in the initial purge. He'd been routing funds to shell companies in preparation for starting a rival firm. They had proof, clear and indisputable. Morton was arrested, charged, and eventually convicted. Marcus got most of his money back through asset seizure and restitution orders. The investigation was over. The mystery was solved. The betrayer had been identified and punished. Marcus felt almost nothing when he heard the news. Relief, maybe? Vindication, certainly, but not the satisfaction he'd expected. Because yes, he'd been right. Yes, someone had betrayed him. Yes, his paranoia had been justified. But he'd still destroyed his company, still fired hundreds of innocent people, still spent months making himself and everyone around him miserable. Being right about the betrayal didn't make him right about his response. He called Co-op into his office to share the news. Co-op listened, nodded, and said, "How do you feel?" "Honestly, empty. I thought this would feel like winning. It just feels like the end of something that should never have started. Maybe that's wisdom. Better late than never." Marcus looked out his window at the city below, at the streets where Co-op used to work, at the streams of people going about their lives. "I've been thinking about something you said early on, about how the street gets dirty every day, but you clean it every day anyway. That the routine is the point, yeah? I think I understand that now. Building trust is the same. It gets broken. You rebuild it. Gets broken again. You rebuild it again. It's not about achieving perfect trust and maintaining it forever. It's about choosing to try every day." Co-op smiled. "Look at you, getting philosophical. I had a good teacher." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and Marcus said, "Thank you for waving at me when I was falling apart, for sitting on that bench, for having lunch with me, for telling me the truth even when it was uncomfortable, for taking this job even though it must seem insane from the outside. You're welcome. And for what it's worth, you're doing better. Not perfect. Still paranoid sometimes. Still harsh when you're stressed. But better. That counts." Marcus knew he was right. He wasn't fixed. Probably never would be completely fixed. The paranoia still lurked in the background, ready to surge forward whenever something went wrong. But now he had tools to manage it, people to talk to, perspective beyond his own fears. And he had proof, living, breathing proof in the form of James Cooper, that trust was possible. That connection could survive risk. That not everyone was waiting to betray him. Over the following year, Meridian slowly healed. The remaining employees relaxed as the atmosphere of fear dissipated. New hires brought fresh energy. Clients who'd left came back, cautiously at first, then with renewed confidence. The company would never be what it was before the purge, but it was becoming something different, something perhaps more sustainable. Marcus rebuilt his board with people who'd challenge him, not just agree with him. He instituted policies for whistleblowers and anonymous feedback. He created pathways for concerns to be raised without fear of retaliation. He tried, genuinely tried, to build a culture where people could be honest instead of strategic. It didn't always work. Some betrayals were inevitable. Some people did take advantage of trust. Some decisions based on faith in humanity turned out to be mistakes. But Marcus survived those betrayals without destroying everything around him. He'd learned that being wounded didn't require wounding everyone else in response. That paranoia was a choice, not an inevitability. And every morning, without fail, when Marcus arrived at Meridian Tower, James Cooper would be somewhere in the building, doing his rounds, checking in with employees, maintaining the integrity that had become his responsibility. And every morning, they'd wave at each other, a simple gesture, a small acknowledgement, a reminder that trust starts with tiny acts of faith, repeated daily until they become something stronger than fear. 2 years after that panic attack on the sidewalk, Marcus stood in the main lobby of Meridian Tower during the company's annual celebration. The space was filled with employees, their voices creating a warm buzz of conversation and laughter. They were celebrating growth, recovery, a year of profits that had exceeded projections. But more than that, they were celebrating something harder to quantify. The return of humanity to a building that had felt like a prison. The cameras were mostly gone now. The security guards had been reduced to reasonable numbers. People smiled in the hallways again, made jokes, took risks on new ideas without fear that failure would mean termination. The atmosphere had shifted from survival mode to something approaching actual community. Coop stood near the refreshment table, tugging at his tie with visible discomfort. He'd never gotten used to formal wear, still preferred his simple work clothes. But he wore the suit when occasions demanded it, just as he did everything else in his role, with patience, consistency, and a quiet dignity that commanded respect without demanding it. Several employees surrounded him, engaged in genuine conversation. Not the forced networking that characterized most corporate events, but real dialogue. They treated him as what he'd become, a valued member of leadership whose opinion mattered, whose presence made the company better. Marcus watched from across the room, a glass of wine in his hand that he'd barely touched. He was thinking about probability, about the astronomical odds that had led to this moment, that a random panic attack would happen at the exact time a street cleaner was nearby, that the street cleaner would know how to help, that simple conversations would lead to fundamental transformation. Patricia Chun materialized beside him, her own glass of champagne held with casual confidence. She'd returned to Meridian 6 months after the purge, accepting Marcus's apology with cautious optimism and a list of conditions that would prevent history from repeating itself. "You're staring," she observed. "I'm reflecting," Marcus corrected. "On what? Your genius decision to hire a street cleaner as an executive? Or on the fact that you nearly destroyed everything before stumbling into the one move that saved you?" "Both, probably." Marcus sipped his wine. "People still talk about it, don't they? About whether I'm visionary or insane, constantly. The business press can't decide if you're a leadership innovator or if you had some kind of breakdown that accidentally worked out." Patricia smiled. "For what it's worth, I think you're neither. I think you were drowning and someone threw you a rope and you were smart enough to grab it. That's not very flattering. It's honest, which is more valuable than flattery, something you're finally learning." She paused, her expression turning serious. "You're different now, Marcus. Not perfect. You still push too hard sometimes. Still have moments where the old paranoia surfaces and everyone has to talk you down. But you're human again, flawed, struggling, occasionally wrong. It's an improvement." Marcus considered arguing, then decided against it. She was right. He was different. Still driven, still ambitious, still carrying scars that would never fully heal. But no longer alone in a fortress of his own construction, no longer convinced that every hand extended in friendship was really reaching for his throat. Patricia drifted away to network with other executives. Marcus remained where he was, observing the party, making mental notes about who was connecting with whom, which departments seemed to be building camaraderie, which individuals looked isolated and might need attention. Old habits died hard. The difference was that now he watched from care rather than suspicion. Co-op extracted himself from his conversation and made his way over, loosening his tie the moment he was out of immediate sight. "I hate these things," he said without preamble. "Too many people, too much small talk, too much pretending to care about topics. I don't understand. You can leave whenever you want. No one's keeping you here. Part of the job. Building relationships, being accessible, all that leadership stuff you pay me for." Co-op leaned against the wall beside Marcus. "They're good people, though, most of them. Still intimidated by you, but less than before. That's progress. Do you regret it?" Marcus asked. "Trading streets in fresh air for conference rooms and corporate politics?" Co-op was quiet for a moment, genuinely considering the question. "Sometimes, when I'm stuck in my 4th meeting of the day, arguing about policy changes that affect 3 people, when I'm wearing uncomfortable shoes and a tie that feels like a noose, when I remember how simple everything used to be," he shrugged. "But mostly no. This matters in ways street cleaning never could. Not because it's more important work, but because I can actually change things here, can actually help people who are struggling. That's worth the uncomfortable shoes." "I never properly thanked you," Marcus said, "for everything. For sitting with me on that bench. For telling me the truth when I needed to hear it. For taking an insane job offer from a man who just had a public breakdown. You've thanked me plenty, and you're still thanking me every 2 weeks when you sign my paycheck." Coop smiled slightly. Besides, you did the hard part. I just pointed at the path. You had to actually walk it. The path is still difficult. Some days I slip back into old patterns. Start suspecting people without cause. Start seeing conspiracies in normal mistakes. Start building walls again. I know. I see it happening. That's why I'm here. To call it out before you get too far down that road. Coop straightened up, preparing to rejoin the party. But here's the thing, Marcus. You catch yourself now. You listen when people push back. You course correct instead of doubling down. That's the difference between who you were and who you are. He walked away, heading back toward the crowd with visible reluctance, but genuine commitment. Marcus watched him go. This man who'd been invisible for years, who'd become the most important person in his professional life through nothing more complicated than basic human decency and honest conversation. The party continued for another hour. Speeches were made, awards were given, toasts were raised. Marcus participated in it all with something approaching genuine enjoyment. Not the manic energy that had characterized his earlier years, but a steadier satisfaction. The pride of building something sustainable rather than something spectacular. When the event finally ended and people began filtering out, Marcus found himself back at the window overlooking the street. The same window where he'd stood 2 years ago, watching Co-op sweep the sidewalk, wondering why that simple wave bothered him so much. He understood now. The wave had bothered him because it represented something his paranoid worldview couldn't accommodate. Kindness without agenda. Connection without manipulation. A gesture that expected nothing in return. His mind had treated it as an anomaly, a glitch in the matrix of universal self-interest. Turns out the glitch wasn't in Co-op. It was in Marcus's understanding of human nature. People were capable of betrayal. Yes, someone had stolen from him, proven that trust could be weaponized, demonstrated that vulnerability came with real costs. But people were also capable of sitting with strangers during panic attacks, of offering wisdom to billionaires who had no power over them, of taking risks on damaged people who might never recover. Both things were true. The challenge was accepting that and building a life anyway. Coop appeared beside him at the window, jacket off now, pie stuffed in his pocket. Heading out? He asked. In a minute. Just thinking. About what? About probability. About coincidence. About the fact that you happened to be sweeping that exact piece of sidewalk at the exact moment I fell apart. A few minutes earlier or later, and we never have that conversation. I never change. The company probably collapses. Everything goes different. Co-op nodded slowly. That's one way to look at it. What's the other way? That it wasn't coincidence. That you'd been showing signs of breaking for weeks, and eventually it was going to happen somewhere. That I'd been waving at you for months, establishing a pattern of non-threatening contact. That when you finally cracked, your brain remembered there was one person nearby who'd shown consistent kindness. So that's where you went. Coop shrugged. Less romantic than fate, more like physics. Pressure builds until something breaks, and it breaks in the direction of least resistance. So I broke in your direction because you were safe. You broke in my direction because I was there, and because some part of you recognized that I wasn't a threat. The rest is just two people talking honestly about difficult things. Nothing magical about it. Marcus smiled. You're very committed to demystifying your own importance. I'm committed to keeping things in perspective. You give me too much credit. I start believing I'm special. Next thing you know, I'm the one having panic attacks because I can't live up to my own legend. Co-op pulled his jacket on. I'm going home. Got an early morning tomorrow. Still waking up at 4:30. Some habits stick. Plus, I like the quiet. City's different before everyone else wakes up. Peaceful. They walked to the elevator together, rode down in comfortable silence. The lobby was empty now, except for night security. The city outside was dark, punctuated by streetlights, and the windows of buildings where other people worked late or lived their complicated lives. At the door, they paused. This was usually where they separated, Co-op heading to the subway, Marcus to his waiting car. But tonight felt different somehow, like an ending, or maybe a beginning, or maybe just another point on a continuous line that had no clear markers. Same time tomorrow? Co-op asked. Same time tomorrow, Marcus confirmed. They waved at each other. The same simple gesture that had started everything. A small acknowledgement of shared humanity, repeated daily, until it became something stronger than fear, more durable than suspicion, more valuable than any amount of money Marcus had ever made. Co-op disappeared into the night. Marcus climbed into his car, and as his driver pulled into traffic, Marcus looked back at Meridian Tower, at the building he'd nearly destroyed in his quest for absolute security, now rebuilt on a foundation of cautious trust and honest connection. The street got dirty. You cleaned it. Trust got broken. You rebuilt it. That was the work. That was life. That was the only path forward that didn't end in isolation and panic and the slow death of everything that made existence worthwhile. Marcus Ashford was still a billionaire, still carried wounds that would never fully heal, still had days where paranoia whispered that everyone was lying, everyone was plotting, everyone was waiting for their chance to betray him. But now he had something else too, proof that kindness existed, that honest friendship was possible, that trust could survive risk, that a man could fall apart completely and be rebuilt by the patient hands of someone who expected nothing in return except basic human decency. The kind of thing that happened 1,000 times a day between people who'd learned to trust each other. The kind of thing that changed everything.